Good morning. Thank you for joining us on behalf of the Ottawa Board of Trade and the Ottawa Business Journal. Welcome to the Post-Budget Breakfast. I'm Michael Curran from the Ottawa Business Journal. This event continues a long tradition with the Board of Trade and OBJ dating back many years, in fact, dating back decades. And that tradition is that local business people come together after the federal budget to determine what it means for the National Capital Region. In Ottawa, it's hard to overestimate the importance of the federal budget. It includes investments, policies, political priorities. It's all packed into one document, and a big, thick document this year. Our promise to you with this event, as always, is that you will be much more informed about the country's finances and what it means for your business and you as a Canadian citizen. It's now my pleasure to introduce my co-host for this event. Please welcome Su-Ling Ching, the President and CEO of the Ottawa Board of Trade. Welcome, Su-Ling.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning.
Well, maybe a bit of a long night for you. I'm sure you were on some policy calls. What's your initial reaction to the federal budget, Su-Ling?
Well, we're excited to be here with everyone this morning, and we've been waiting a while for this federal budget, and it's important because, of course, the federal government is a big part of how we're going to support businesses through this crisis and build a strong foundation for the future. So we've been advocating along with our colleagues at the Ontario and Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to hear from our chief economist from the Canadian Chamber a little bit later. But a lot of what we had been asking for is in the budget in terms of supporting businesses. So it's provided some certainty as we continue to mitigate the countermeasures for this third wave. And we were happy to see the extension of and the introduction of some new business supports.
Yeah, it was a interesting, massive document, as indicated, and it also has such far-reaching impact. I don't think we've ever appreciated the role, the important role of the federal and provincial governments in the regional and provincial and national economies. It's quite something to see all of this, and quite an extraordinary time for us to be seeing a federal government. That's obviously why it took a couple of years to get one out.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just what they're able to provide in terms of programming, though, but it's the policies that they make that allow the private sector to thrive, because that's how we will drive our economy as well.
Yeah, excellent point. So listen, before we get to our keynote, I just want to recognize some of the great partners that line up to make this event possible. This first partner is MNP. MNP has been a longtime partner. I remember us fondly in the Chateau Laurier Ballroom having several hundred people. MNP, of course, is one of Canada's leading national accounting and business consulting firms, and it responds to the needs of its clients, both in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. MNP is an increasingly large presence here in Ottawa. By the way, it just did a bit of an acquisition. In fact, it's on a string of acquisitions. So we want to thank MNP and specifically its managing partner, Michael Demetrio, and we'll hear from Gavin Miranda later in today's broadcast.
For sure. Also, thank you to our second sponsor, which is Impact Public Affairs. Impact Public Affairs was founded in 1997, and it's a full-service government relations and communications firm based here in Ottawa with offices across Canada. They have a deep level of experience and a track record for success in ensuring that its strategies allow organizations to deliver effective messages to government officials, the public, and key stakeholders. So I think their president, Hugh Williams, is probably very busy these days, and we're excited to have Hugh join us with them to do the Q&A with the minister.
Yeah. And the next sponsor is Algonquin College, obviously a huge player in our education and post-secondary here. We were pleased to have its president and CEO, Claude Brule, join us in our pre-broadcast networking. We're having lots of fun with that virtual networking. People get to bump into people they haven't seen. So thank you to Algonquin and Claude.
Thank you. And then we want to say thank you to our global event partner, and that's Oakwood Design and Build, and they are supporting us all throughout the year. It is a fourth generation family business founded in 1956 by a German immigrant with a hard work ethic and trained in woodworking. Today, the company is state-of-the-art home renovation and custom builder lead by entrepreneur John Liptak and his two daughters. The company has a 10 million LEED Platinum headquarters and showroom in Ottawa, and it's known for embracing new technologies. So thank you to Oakwood Build and Design.
So let's get right down into it. Here's a preview of what we have coming up. First off, we have local MP and Minister Mona Fortier, who will provide a bit of an update on the federal government budget. Then Hugh Williams, as we just talked about from Impact Public Affairs, will guide us through a question and answer session. Around the top of the hour, Gavin Miranda from MNP, the regional tax leader, will provide his analysis on what the federal budget means for you. And we'll include with a great panel discussion that includes Kevin Page, the president and CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy at the University of Ottawa. Of course, Kevin was the very first parliamentary budget officer, so that his insights are always invaluable. Susan Delacourt, a national contributor to the Toronto Star, an expert on the political side of Ottawa. And finally, Dr. Trevin Stratton, the chief economist and VP at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to duck out now, Sue Ling, and I'll hand things over to you to introduce Minister Mona Fortier.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Well, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Minister Mona Fortier, who has been a wonderful support for us here in Ottawa and across Canada over this last year in particular. Mona was elected in 2017 as the first female member of parliament for Ottawa-Vanier. She's known for getting involved and taking action, and her expertise covers the areas of healthcare, education, job creation, and Francophone affairs. Prior to being elected, the minister worked in communications and market development at La Cité and managed her own strategic communications firm. She's also served on several not-for-profit boards of directors, including Montfort, the Ontario Provincial Advisory Committee on Francophone Affairs, and the Shaw Centre. In addition, she's received numerous awards for her community involvement, including the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012. She's a mother of three, an Ottawa University graduate, a community leader, and an entrepreneur. Please welcome Canada's Associate Minister of Finance and Minister of Middle Class Prosperity, Honourable Mona Fortier.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Ça me fait tellement plaisir de vous voir ce matin. And I really want to thank you for the warm welcome, Michael and Sue Ling, especially the fact that you are both very hardworking advocates for the needs and businesses of our community here in the National Capital Region, especially Ottawa. And I want you to know that your tireless advocacy and your strong voices and efficient voices share the fact that you were heard. And I believe we're confirming that today, Sue Ling, that we heard you during the pre-budget consultations we had last February, and I think also we spoke again in March. So I do hope you will see your suggestions and recommendations for growth and recovery that are reflected in this budget.
Thank
you. It's a pleasure to join you and everyone here at the Ottawa Board of Trade for the post-budget breakfast. And let me assure you, today we have a lot to talk about. But before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that I am joining you today from Ottawa, which is on Algonquin and Anishinaabe traditional territory. Now, I hope you all have been able to take a read through the budget that was tabled yesterday. But if you haven't been able to read it through all those 700 pages of measures and investments, I'm glad I can be here to brief you all this morning on this plan for growth, fairness, and resilience. Ce budget est un plan ambitieux et audacieux qui se concentre sur deux éléments principaux. Terminer la lutte contre la COVID et jeter les bases d'une reprise économique solide. Depuis le début, nous avons clairement indiqué que notre première priorité est de combattre la pandémie et de sauver des vies. La plus grande campagne d'immunisation de l'histoire du Canada est en cours et d'ici la fin septembre, le Canada aura reçu plus qu'assez de doses pour que chaque adulte soit entièrement vacciné. Le budget prévoit $1 milliard supplémentaires pour aider à accélérer les vaccinations et $4 milliards supplémentaires pour nos systèmes de soins de santé. Et je sais combien cet investissement sera important pour nous ici en Ontario. Our second priority after fighting COVID is supporting people and businesses through this crisis and building back better, in particular, small businesses. Through this plan, we will make targeted investments in Canada's businesses so they can hire and train Canada's workers, who will then have more money to spend, spurring our recovery and growing an economy with more opportunities for everyone. For example, small businesses, especially those here in Ottawa, will appreciate our commitment to invest $4 billion to support 160,000 small and medium businesses to enter the digital economy. And that's not just to bringing retail stores online, although it is a part of it. This funding will also help business automate with artificial intelligence, protect their intellectual property, and become more competitive in the labor market. And I'm glad I had a chance to speak with Michael Tremblay from Invest Ottawa about this program yesterday. And he was thankful about the potential impact of this program on our local economy and job creation for Ottawa, and especially for young people. Now, for businesses that have been hit hardest by the pandemic, we know who they are: tourism, hospitality, restaurants. Hiring the workers they need to grow is a cost they may worry about taking on. To date, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy has helped more than 5.3 million Canadians keep their jobs. The Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy and lockdown support have helped more than 154,000 organizations with rent, mortgage, and other expenses. Now, we will continue to be there for businesses for as long as they need. And this is why Budget 2021 proposes to extend the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy and lockdown support for businesses and other organizations until September 25th, 2021. Nous introduirons également le nouveau programme d'embauche pour la relance économique au Canada à l'intention des employeurs admissibles qui continuent de subir des baisses de revenus admissibles par rapport à ce qu'ils étaient avant la pandémie. La subvention proposée permettrait de compenser une partie des coûts supplémentaires que les employeurs assument lors de la réouverture, soit en augmentant les salaires ou les heures travaillées, soit en embauchant du personnel. Notre objectif est de faire en sorte qu'il soit aussi facile que possible pour les entreprises d'embaucher de nouveaux travailleurs au moment de la réouverture de l'économie. And Budget 2021 also focuses on where COVID has struck hardest: women and young people, low-wage workers, and, as I said earlier, small and medium businesses. In the labor market, for example, women were hit earlier and harder, and their jobs continue to recover more slowly. Long-standing gender inequities have only been amplified over the course of the pandemic, and it has put decades of hard-fought gains for women in the workplace at risk. More than 16,000 women have dropped out of the labor force completely, while the male labor force has grown by 91,000. This is a she-session. Et le budget 2021 présente un vaste plan d'emploi et de croissance qui vise à bâtir une reprise qui donne à toutes les femmes du Canada la capacité de participer pleinement à l'économie. Il propose de fournir jusqu'à 146,9 millions de dollars sur 4 ans pour renforcer la stratégie pour l'entrepreneuriat féminin, qui permet aux femmes entrepreneurs d'avoir un meilleur accès au financement, au mentorat et à la formation. So our women's strategy for entrepreneurship will receive more than $146 million on 4 years to continue to enable entrepreneurship, women entrepreneurs to have better access to funding, to mentorship, and to training. And COVID has made it clear that childcare is not only a social issue, but also an urgent economic issue that is resonating across sectors, regions, and even income brackets. School and childcare closures have been difficult for parents. Some have had to leave their jobs or reduce their hours significantly. And without access to childcare, parents, usually mothers, cannot fully participate in our economy. Canada-wide early learning and childcare is the national economic policy that we need now, today. The benefits are threefold. It provides jobs for workers, the majority of whom are women. It enables parents, again, particularly mothers, to reach their full economic potential. And it creates a generation of engaged and well-prepared young learners. Now we're committing up to $30 billion over 5 years to build a high-quality, affordable, and accessible early learning and childcare system across Canada. Our short-term goal is to reduce the average cost of childcare by 50% by the end of 2022 and reach a $10 per day childcare system by the end of 2026. This investment will work to grow our economy by as much as 1.2%, increasing the size of our workforce with an additional 240,000 workers. That will make a difference in Ottawa also. Our decision last year to do whatever it takes to support Canadians is already paying off. Now, decisive government action prevented economic scarring in our businesses and our households, allowing the Canadian economy to begin strongly rebounding from the COVID recession, even before we have finished our fight against the virus. This is an ambitious budget. There's no doubt about it. Mais c'est notre chance historique de nous redresser d'une manière qui profitera à plus de gens, pour donner à nos femmes plus d'opportunités de réussir, to get our people back to work. And I will conclude by saying that yesterday was a demonstration that our government will continue to stand together with Canadians during this challenging time. We will work with provinces, municipalities, and you as partners, because we need to stand together, as I said earlier. We have your back. On vous soutient. Thank you very much for having me this morning. And I'm glad I'll have an opportunity to respond to your questions or comments. Over to you. I will be able to speak with you now.
Thank you very much, Minister. We appreciate your time here this morning. So I'm now anxious to introduce Hugh Williams, who is the President of Impact, to ask a few questions, and I'll turn it over to you, Hugh.
Great, Minister. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you've done in the lead up to this. Obviously, a monumental budget, over 700 pages. I feel like you've had to study for this test for the past couple of weeks. So I'll try to hit you rapid fire as much as possible, and because I've been hearing from business leaders across the region, obviously, but across the country as well. The first question, the Board of Trade, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, when they looked at the budget, I think that the thing that really stood out was the balance between saving the economy and taking on debt. Tell me about a little bit about how as Associate Minister of Finance that balance was struck.
Well, first, again, thank you very much for your advocacy. Also, in the past few weeks, everybody has been really sharing their thoughts, and that while we were getting the budget ready, we were also making sure that we were making decisions that would help grow our economy, have a fairer, inclusive, and green economy, and especially create jobs and growth. And to be able to do that, we knew that we needed to fight the virus, first of all, and support businesses, workers, and families as much as we could to make sure that we would not have and prevent from scarring and prevent from, letting down Canadians. And that was our first strategy. And those investments will be providing us an opportunity to grow our economy. And that's how we're going to balance it out. We've been responsible, and we have identified, of course, ways to make sure that we will continue to support businesses, but also give them the tools to be able to recover from this pandemic, and working together also with provinces, territories, and municipalities to go forward with that.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you on behalf of the countless businesses across the country who really felt that not only were their businesses saved, but their employees were saved with the wage subsidy program. I mean, the feedback from that has been phenomenal, and I just think you deserve a real nod for more than a nod for recognizing that early and then extending that program. And I know this budget extends it till September, so thank you for that. I think that the one element when I think of the national capital, and I've certainly heard from hotels and tourism in the area over the last 12 hours, is so much of that business in tourism is going to be missed this summer, and then even into the fall, cancellations of conventions are happening. People are reacting in real time. Are you sensitive to the fact that you may need to help that sector in particular, as other parts of the economy get weaned off?
Well, I think you're raising a really big question. I mean, many groups were affected during the pandemic. Many sectors were affected during this pandemic. And you raised it: tourism, hospitality, arts and culture. And I believe in this budget, we are providing not only supports to continue to support them through the current pandemic we're in, so third wave, as we said, we will continue those measures until September, end of September, but also by providing investments in tourism. Over $500 million will be invested in that sector. And you'll see that it will help us manage, of course, not only the next 5 months, but especially the next 2-3 years we need to go through. And FedDev and our economic regional development, FedDev will be able to support and develop those approaches with businesses. And even, I have to say, I don't know if you saw it, but the National Arts Center is receiving increased funding to support artists, to also make sure that it is a driver to support these artists and Indigenous artists into the difficult situation we've been in. So we'll have to work together. I don't have all of the specifics yet, but we provided, I think, supports to be able to bridge to the other side while we fight the pandemic, but also have solutions to recover.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenging things that the private sector has to understand is that you're solving this problem in real time. It's not like that there's a system in place that says, okay, how do we handle a once in a century pandemic?
I haven't found a recipe yet, Hugh.
Yeah, and it's a tough situation, and I think the responsiveness has definitely been there. Let me ask you, the luxury tax got a lot of attention as part of the media. I think there was a really elegant effort to make sure there wasn't a cliff at the $100,000 mark, that it was brought in on a blended rate. Tell me about the thinking behind that.
Well, I have to go back to a platform commitment we did in 2019 that we would bring forward a luxury tax. We looked at it very closely, and what we brought forward was the $100,000 for cars, and then for pleasure boats, we had a threshold of $250,000. So we want to make sure we do find revenue, and of course, those that have the opportunity to to create revenue, we will be imposing that luxury tax. And again, we all have a share to bring revenue in, and this is one way that we'll be doing it.
Yeah, interesting, and I think that the fact that in looking at that, I understand there's going to be a second budget implementation act in the fall that's going to work out a lot of the details that have been laid out. What's in the budget? I mean, again, a 726-page document. What's in the budget that you'd like us to know that maybe kind of a hidden gem? I noticed that, for example, in Ottawa, there was $20 million to Canadian Blood Services, which is a hugely important initiative I've been involved with for a long time as a volunteer. Any other little gems that you'd want to bring to people's attention?
Well, first, again, I just want to bring back the idea that we want to create 1 million jobs. We need people back to work. So to be able to do that, as you'll see in the budget, there are many levers to do this. And we've also, as I said during my statement, bringing a transformative investment into childcare system across the country. We have a great model in Quebec that has made a difference in economic terms for the Quebecers. So we will be looking forward to doing that and working with the provinces and territories. So imagine cutting the fees by half by 2022 for parents is going to be a game changer. And then when we get to 2026, $10 a day for daycare, that will also give more opportunities for women to go back to work, and also for families to have affordable daycares. And we're also investing into affordable housing, 35,000 units. Now, I don't know if you remember, but a couple of months ago, we announced $31.9 million for 4 initiatives to create units and bring housing rapidly to Ottawa. This has made also another game changer, and that's why we're investing $1.5 billion in rapid housing, where Ottawa will get its fair share, and we will continue on that track of giving opportunities for those that don't have a safe place to call home to have one. And also, one more thing I'd like to share is that we're bringing supports to help, critical investments to help businesses grow. And we'll be able to, of course, share more of those details as we lay out the budget.
Yeah, I think the childcare vision as a competitive advantage, or as infrastructure that allows the economy to grow, is a really interesting concept. Maybe I'll close on the subject of infrastructure. Everybody's interested in infrastructure investments, and I know there's money in the budget for infrastructure. One of the concerns we hear a lot from the construction sector is whether that money is flowing as efficiently as possible. Any thoughts on that, or just viewpoint to making sure that's getting spent quickly but also smartly? I know it's a tough balance.
Well, I'll tell you, it's going to be one way to really stimulate our economy, especially in the region. We know that retrofits will be something very appealing to homeowners or even business owners. Also, just looking at how we want to move forward with different transit projects. I think Ottawa has the the next leg of our LRT, and we will be able to look at that more closely. And during my pre-budget consultations, there were many ideas coming from many stakeholders. So now we have to look at making sure we can find those investments for our communities. I'm just thinking in my writing, the Byward Market Realm project is one that we might want to look at. So we'll just need to be together and make sure that we get our fair share of investments in infrastructure, and also making sure that it's green and clean growth that we'll be focusing on.
Well, thank you for your time. We're running exactly on time. I really appreciate the candid answers and the ability to take the questions unscripted, and also really just for making sure you're supporting the business conversation here in the nation's capital. As obviously a member for Vanya, but as a minister, it's hugely appreciated. So I'll turn it back over now to Su Ling, but thank you, Minister, for the time.
And before you go, Hugh, I just want to thank everybody again for working with me and making sure that I hear you out and make sure that we have some measures in this budget that will support our communities, especially our small business, of course, that have been hit hard in our community. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Minister Fortier. Mr. Fortier, I want to thank you for your ongoing collaboration with us, and we look forward to working with you as we get through all of this together. These are difficult or challenging times for many of us, yourself included, and all of your political colleagues across all parties. So we're grateful for your leadership, and we look forward to talking to you again soon as we go through. Thank you for being here. And Hugh, thank you so much for your support and your insights. And we appreciate Impact Public Affairs continuing to support us in this event. And we look forward to seeing you again soon as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our expert analysis of the federal budget through Gavin Miranda of MNP. Gavin is the regional tax leader with MNP in the Eastern Ontario region and has more than 20 years of experience helping private and public companies with their tax compliance, tax consulting, and tax provisioning needs. Gavin is a CPA and CA. Thank you very much for being here, Gavin. Take it away. You're on mute.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for having us back. We enjoy sponsoring this event. So as Minister Fortier said, there was a lot in the budget, as well as what Hugh said, 725 pages is how long it is. So there's a lot to digest. I'll go through some of the technical items here, and Minister Fortier certainly went through the highlights in terms of, the national childcare, the investments in various sectors. And here we'll talk about how we digest that down in some of the tax measures that are coming up. So let's roll through this here, Khaled. Next slide. Keep going. Yeah, next one. So some of the highlights here, the budget is focusing from the emergency response that we're doing to recovery. So the COVID program supports extension of the CEWS and the CERS, which is the rental program. As Minister Fortier said, the New Canada Recovery Hiring Program. One of the big highlights was immediate deductions for investments in certain equipment, which will be very valuable to my clients and certainly to companies in the Ottawa area and Eastern Ontario, and interest deductibility limitations. They introduced a lot of things for consultation, but the good things that we didn't see were no personal tax changes in terms of rate increases or significant corporate tax rate changes. There was a lot of speculation on capital gains exemptions, which didn't happen, intergenerational transfers, and principal residence exemptions stayed intact. So that's all great. Next slide. So the emergency business support that continued on, keep going. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and Rent Subsidy were extended to September 2021. The subsidy dates will gradually decline over the July to September periods as they try to slowly wean the economy off and have it into recovery mode. But the government does have the flexibility to add periods to November 2021 if they so choose. The CEBA loan that helped businesses that was funded up to $60,000, that's not going to be extended beyond June 30th. So if you need to apply, make sure that you apply for those support items. And the lockdown support for CERS extended to September 25th, and it's currently at a 25% rate. So in Ontario, obviously, that can be very useful to businesses and small businesses in this area. And once again, we thank the government for extending that. Next slide. As we noted earlier, this new program for the Canada Recovery Hiring Benefit is going to give eligible employers a subsidy of 50% of incremental remuneration paid to employees in the upcoming periods of June 6th to November 20th, 2021. Now, the eligible employees can claim one or the other. They can either claim the wage subsidy or the Canada Recovery Hiring Benefit for a particular period. Now, they qualify based on if they have the same drop in revenue, but the revenue drop is going to be a 10% drop in revenue compared to previously. So initial, the pay period that you're going to measure yourself against is March 4th to April 10th. So next. The Canada Recovery Benefit was also extended to help people in this pandemic from 38 to 50 weeks. The caregiving benefit was also extended, again, supporting the recovery and helping people as we hit this third wave that we're going through right now. And the extension of those benefits as well as EI benefits can be moved further until November 2021 if the government so chooses. Next slide. So there were some corporate tax measures announced that we'll go through. So the budget introduced a temporary immediate deduction of new property. It doesn't apply to goodwill or buildings by a Canadian-controlled private corporation, which is mainly a lot of the small businesses that are here in Ottawa and in the National Capital Region. This is for property that's acquired after budget day and becomes available to be used before January 2024. So it's a maximum of $1.5 million per year that you can just write off if you acquire that equipment. So that's an immediate deduction, which would generate investments in capital for companies that they'll use in their business, and it has to be shared amongst the group of companies that you operate. So we see this as a very important measure for companies in stimulating growth as they make investments, not only in jobs through their hiring program, but also in terms of capital investments. Next slide. The other thing that the government's introducing is to limit some interest expense. This is targeted primarily at larger companies, and it will limit your interest expense, what you deduct to generate income. So if you borrow to buy equipment or you borrow to buy, in your business to expand, it will only allow you to deduct a certain amount. So a fixed ratio of 40% of your interest beginning on or after January 1st, 2023, that drops to 30% in January 1, 2024. So it'll apply to new and existing borrowings as well. And we were glad to see, we have to see the detailed legislation on this, obviously, but next slide. We were glad to see that there are exceptions for small companies, those that don't have large capital bases in excess of 15 million. And that 15 million magic number is when you start to lose your small business deduction. So, they're really saying, well, if you're a small company, you need that financing. We're not going to limit you, which is great. It will also not apply to groups of corporations who have interest expenses less than $250,000. And so we want to see the further legislation, but this could have some impact to larger corporate Canadian-controlled private corporations as they grow. So we'll have to monitor that. But the good thing is that if you are denied this interest deduction, you can carry it back 3 years and forward 20, just like you can carry losses. So that's a good thing in terms of keeping that you pay the expense, and hopefully you'll keep getting the expense in another year. Next slide. So there are some other measures that they introduced, consultations to enhance disclosures, combat evasion. They did say they're going to establish a minimum wage of $15 an hour, rising with inflation. So that's something to be aware of with the provincial and territorial wages. Ontario is now at $14.25, so businesses will need to take that into account. Next slide. So personal tax measures, COVID-19 benefit repayment, they enhanced the Canada Workers Benefit a little bit and scaled it back when it declines. Eligibility for disability tax credit and northern residence deduction, and some minor changes to those that receive income that were taxed on it but weren't actually getting RSP room, that were doctors that are vital in this frontline workers. Those people are able to get some RSP room back. So next slide. For those that are elderly, we know they've been hit significantly in terms of their benefits and long-term care, so on and so forth. Oas Payments, one time of $500 for those over the age of 75, and they're going to increase the OAS payments for pensioners 75 years and over by 10% on an ongoing basis as of July 2022. So that's helping our seniors that have contributed in the past to this economy. The climate action incentive payments are going to be made quarterly, so you don't have to wait till you file your return, and that's going to start in 2022 as well. Next slide. So there were some indirect tax measures, nothing significant, but one of the things that Hugh and Minister Fortier talked about was the retail tax on luxury cars over 100,000 and aircraft over 200,000 effective 2022. So it'll be 10% or 20% of the value above 100 grand, or for boats, $250,000. So be aware that this tax will apply, and then you'll have to pay GST and HST on top of that tax, on top of this luxury tax as well. So next slide. This one is, as we look around in Ottawa and in the National Capital Region, for sure, we've seen pricing and housing skyrocketing. And this is to make sure that, the unproductive use of housing by non-residents, foreign non-residents, doesn't keep increasing. So there's going to be a 1% annual tax that's going to be levied on them beginning in 2022 for residential real estate. So that's a measure to try and probably cool down a little bit, but also expanding what's in BC. The indirect tax measures that came in, digital services, there's going to be a tax on people consuming, Disney, Netflix, those kinds of things. And the sin taxes are always a common thing that's hit tobacco, and now they're going to look at vaping products as well, including for cannabis. Next slide. And so some final thoughts. This budget was good in terms of helping and making investments in critical areas, continuing to support the recovery of the economy through the hiring program, to the extension of the CEWS, and making sure that there's childcare that's going to be there for people to re-enter the workforce. So we look forward to some more details that are going to be put out by the government, especially in terms of the investments that can be made through capital investments, and for helping grow some of the small businesses as we look around the region. So if you have, if there's more that we'll share as they become available, and as you see more from our firm, we'll distribute it through our website and other platforms. So thank you very much for having me here today, and I'll turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you so much, Gavin, for that expert analysis. Budgets are very technical documents, and that's exactly why we need you and MNP as part of this event to ensure that we get the details. In fact, I watched hours of media coverage last night, Gavin. You touched on a whole bunch of points that I hadn't seen before. So thank you to Gavin Miranda, and thank you to MNP for supporting this event. Hope to see you soon, Gavin.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Well, listen, we're in the wrap-up phase of today's event, and we have an all-star panel, and I'm really excited to get them to weigh in on this. So we're going to bring them on screen one at a time. First off, we have Kevin Page. Kevin, of course, was Canada's first ever parliamentary budget officer, and he is also the current president and CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy at the University of Ottawa. Welcome to you, Kevin.
Hi, Michael.
Our second panelist is an expert on political Ottawa. Susan Delacourt is an Ottawa-based columnist for the Toronto Star, where she has been covering Parliament Hill for a few years, I'd say. Right, Susan?
Yeah, several.
Okay, several. We'll just call it several.
Yeah.
And our third and final panelist is the chief economist and vice president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. He's an award-winning business economist specializing in global and technology change. Please welcome Dr. Trevin Stratton from the Canadian Chamber. Hello, Trevin.
Hi, Michael.
Well, once again, it's great to have you here. I'm really eager to dig into this. And Kevin, I think we're going to start off with you. As Hugh was indicating, he asked the minister about this. A budget, by its very nature, is a balance between investment and debt. So, where do you think the government balanced that, Kevin? How did they get it right? Some of the numbers, of course, the deficit numbers are quite shocking. Oh, and we might be oh, there we go. Kevin will check you. Okay. Kevin, unfortunately, we have a challenge with your microphone. So we'll just put you on hold there for a second. I'll go maybe to Trevin. And Trevin, in fact, maybe I'll ask that same question. Kevin, you've got the expertise in economics. So when you take a look at the debt situation balance with investment, what do you think, Trevin?
Well, I think for businesses, there are a lot of things to like in this budget, that were mentioned in some of the previous presentations. Certainly when it comes to, capital investments and the write-off that is available, that's going to be very useful for a number of different businesses. There's a big focus on growth and jobs, which obviously the business community has been asking for. And that includes some big ticket items that are about economic fundamentals, when it comes to the regulatory burden, when it comes to interprovincial trade barriers, when it comes to the National Trade Corridors Fund for trade enabling infrastructure. There are a lot of different announcements in there that should hopefully help with longer term Canadian competitiveness. At the same time, I mean, it's a lot of money. This is a pretty significant budget. There is a lot of spending. It's going to be a relatively large deficit, though still projected to decrease year over year over the next few years. And so what's going to be very important, I think, first of all, is the government's success in shifting the growth drivers from public spending to private sector investment over the longer term. And in terms of actually meeting their deficit projections going forward, in actually being able to meet their growth targets going forward as well, because that's going to have a big impact on government revenues.
Susan, I want to go to you next. Every budget is meaningless unless the government gets it passed, and unless that political party continues to govern, quite frankly. So, again, I just wanted to start off by asking a big level question: did the budget hit the mark from a political perspective?
Well, if we were not in the middle of a pandemic, and hi everybody, thanks for having me here. If we were not in the middle of the third wave of a pandemic, this might well be a budget that the opposition parties would like to use to topple the government and pitch us into an election. I think that's less a function of the content of the budget and more about how antsy people are in the current minority parliament. That being said, we are not going to have an election because of this budget, almost guaranteed. It's dangerous to make predictions in politics, but Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, has indicated he will probably support this because he doesn't think it's the time for an election. He's right. So is this an election budget? No, immediately. Yes, in the long term. Liberals are saying that all the things they put in this budget, they're very happy to take to a national campaign. So I think politically, I would be less focused, and I am, I think, less focused on how it clears the House of Commons than to how it clears with all the provinces, because it is much of the contents of this budget are highly dependent on negotiations with the provinces. In fact, I don't think I've seen a budget so dependent on provincial buy-in and support.
And of course, you're talking about childcare there, and I was going to dig into that in just a few minutes. Trevor, I'm going to go back to you, and we'll see if we can't get Kevin's mic problem rectified there. The Canadian Chamber would, of course, done a ton of lobbying in advance of this, and maybe never done such important lobbying to make sure that we've got the right stimulus and support for local and regional and national businesses. Give us a sense, Trevin, on if we got the right stimulus and support levels for business.
So our position has always been that we don't necessarily need short-term stimulus. What we need in the short term is support for those businesses in the hardest hit sectors who have, who can't remain in operation because of the pandemic and the restrictions that have been put in place because they rely so much on physical presence. And so definitely the focus on extending the wage subsidy, the rent subsidy, the creation of the new hiring program is specifically targeted for businesses in those sectors, the hardest hit sectors and small businesses. And that's very much appreciated, and a lot of businesses were looking for that, and we certainly were advocating very strongly for that too. And one of the challenges, or one of the things that the government is going to need to keep in mind, is that certainly there's going to need to be flexibility when it comes to some of those programs too. They can't wind them down too quickly. They can't reduce the amounts that are going out too quickly as well. And they have kind of built in some flexibility there. They're supposed to end around September, but they've said they can potentially extend them to November. And so a lot of that will depend on how the pandemic, the health aspects of the pandemic itself actually transpired. And then, in terms of short-term stimulus spending, there is a lot of money that's in savings accounts right now, and a lot of economists out there are saying that there will be pent-up demand once the economy is able to safely reopen and there's widespread vaccination, and that will really kind of spur short-term growth, and there will be an initial rebound that's going to be very significant in the second half of this year because of that. So that's why we said we didn't need kind of short-term spending to add to that growth. What we needed was short-term supports for those businesses, and then focusing on longer-term economic competitiveness measures to turn that initial rebound into a longer-term economic recovery.
Okay. That's a great comment. Kevin, we're going to try to bring you back here. My fingers are crossed. I see your fingers are crossed. So Kevin, I did want to come back to you and just talk about debt. There was a time when a $35 billion deficit would have been a shocking thing, and now we're 10 times that. Is that level of spending warranted, Kevin? Fingers crossed.
Yeah, so massive increases in debt. Can you hear me, Michael?
We are good. You're great now. Thank you.
So big increases in debt. With those large deficits, $350 billion in 2021, $150 billion this year, declining to about $30-40 billion 5 years out. That debt to GDP ratio, the government's fiscal anchor, goes from about 30%, stays relatively flat at 50%. Can you justify literally a 1 year increase in the debt to GDP ratio of 20 percentage points, where it took us literally more than a decade to get it, down that amount through the 90s and early 2000s? I would say only in the context of a global pandemic. And in this context, when you look at what's happening in other countries, large fiscal supports in the US, big increases in deficits and debt, the same in Japan, the same in Australia. Canada is definitely a big spender, like when you look at these IMF comparisons, but it's really on a relative basis. Once we work our way through this crisis, we're still going to have our net debt to GDP numbers are still going to look a lot better than our competitors. And I think, hopefully the bond rating people will kind of look at this and say Canada's in a good stead. But it would be nice if we had a stronger fiscal planning framework, some real fiscal anchors and guardrails, which we don't really have in this budget. But so an opportunity for the Conservatives, I think, really to promote, maybe a new way of looking at fiscal responsibility over the medium term.
That's great, Kevin. I'm going to come back to you with a question on that. First, we'll go back to Susan for a second. Susan, when I think about the context that this budget is being presented in, We're in a state of emergency. We're still in Ontario, at least, to stay at home. You know, it must be very difficult for political parties such as the Liberals to have their messages break through, but to have a budget message break through and communicate with people is especially hard. Did the budget have the right measures to break through? Maybe I'll call it the pandemic fog that we're in.
That's a really good question, Michael, and I'm not sure. I think that people are rightly preoccupied right now with way bigger things in their lives, especially here in Ontario where things are urgent. The government apparently thought about this budget in 3 timelines, and so maybe that's the way we should look at it. One was Victoria Day, as May 24th weekend when Ontario are things going to be better by then? Is there anything in this budget to get us through to that? I think some of the other panelists have talked about that. The next one is Thanksgiving, when we hope that most of Canadians are vaccinated and that we are starting to talk about recovery. And their third one was something Kevin alluded to, is a 5-year timeline. It's where is Canada going to be in 5 years? And so I think this in normal times would have been a big budget to try to bring out there. We're going to hear a lot about childcare, but then it's going to go away because it's going to have to be negotiated. I'll just sum up by saying I'm sort of thinking in terms of 3 C's right now about this budget. COVID is the first one. The next one is climate. We have a big climate summit with the United States this week, and I think that's where the focus is going to turn. And then the other C is all the cares: home care, long-term care, health care, child care. Those are all things that, as I said, require this government to negotiate with the provinces, and it means that there's no instant solutions to any of those care issues.
Yeah, I think those 3 C's are the right ones that are on people's minds. Trevor, I'm going to come to you. We've referenced a couple of times childcare, and I want to get your economist's perspective on it. So much was made for good reason, by the way, that this was the first federal budget presented by a female finance minister and also a working mom. So I think it's high time that we had a female budget minister, by the way. So as an economist, though, I'm sure you're always looking and urging the federal government to make smart economic investments. And there's been a lot of talk about $10 a day daycare and whether that is a smart investment. What's your perspective as an economist on that, Trevin?
So I think that certainly we agree with the objectives of it, and I think most economists would say the same. I mean, the workforce aspect of it is so important for growing the economy and having a large economic base, and definitely during the pandemic, there are challenges that many women are facing getting back into the workforce that men aren't, at least not at the same level. The question isn't about the objective of childcare itself. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Is this the right way to go about it? And there are certainly different views on that. One thing that I would like to point out is that creating a national program is going to take time, and there are a lot of women that need support right now. And so, how is that going to be resolved is a question as well. And certainly to Susan's points as well, we're going to have to see how the negotiations go with the feds and the provinces going forward too.
Okay. Kevin, I want to come back to you and ask a little bit. I've heard terms like guardrails and fiscal anchors, and maybe you can start off by just explaining why you think those are important, by the way, for today's audience. But I also wanted to get you to comment on effectively the permanent spending built into this federal budget. So we talked about the size of the deficit, and hopefully it will shrink as a portion of GDP. But are you concerned about the permanent spending that we're building in, and whether or not we can pay for this in the long run?
So, Michael, on the permanent spending part of your question, I would say that there's definitely even once we work our way through this COVID period of time that Susan talked about, and we get to the medium term, we have a small, what economists would call a structural deficit. So the economy, we're still running a deficit, even though the economy is operating at trend or full capacity. And it's about 1 percentage point of GDP. you know, obviously a lot of that is probably, or a good part of that would be the childcare program that, you know, that they've set aside, you know, the better part of $10 billion a year in those outer years. I think, you know, so the finance people, and I used to be one, will probably argue that in the context of very low interest rates, higher growth relative to interest rates, that size of structural deficit is not a problem. We could run it. You know, the conservatives may argue that we really don't need that, even a structural deficit. We should be back at zero. And so that's one way of looking at it. In terms of fiscal sustainability, there's analysis gets done at the Parliamentary Budget Office, the IMF. We saw projections in Finance Canada. When you look at the federal structure, revenue spending, even with this much higher debt to GDP ratio, we look sustainable. Debt declines relative to income as you move further and further out from, you know, where we are right now. I think when bond rating people look at that, they're well aware that Canada, as a federal government, is fiscally sustainable. Most provinces are not. So we have this intergovernmental fiscal imbalance that I think, again, that was one of the reasons why premiers were saying I need a better part of $30 billion a year. So, I mean, I think these issues, anchors and guardrails, I think like Canadians, we saw in the 1990s and early 2000s that fiscal discipline pays off. Like we saw a significant reduction in debt to GDP ratios from the mid 1990s to, you know, the financial crisis. And I mean, we're living in a time, I think the government thinks that the economics of deficits have fundamentally changed. That low interest rates are a game changer and they could just spend. Unfortunately, like it's possible, yeah, with all the stimulus coming from monetary policy and fiscal policy, like you can get some instability. And you hear these great economists, Trevin is one, but there's also people like, you know, Summers and others, Blanchard, that are saying like you could actually build up inflation if you keep stimulating the economy. And that would mean higher interest rates. And in an economy where there's an enormous amount of domestic debt, not just government debt, but household debt, financial, non-financial debt, that debt can get very heavy very quickly if we should find ourselves in a period of sustained inflation. No one's saying it's going to happen right away, but so it's more that, as you know, Susan was saying, as you move further down, it could become an issue.
It's almost like we've forgotten that inflation might exist. It's a long forgotten thought. Susan, we're going to go to you for the final question. You referenced earlier that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are likely to support Justin Trudeau and the Liberals on this budget. So how do you? But at the same time, we're still in a minority parliament and kind of well past or coming to the average tenure of a minority government. How do you think this is going to play out in terms of a potential general election?
It's going to be, obviously the federal Liberals believe that this is going to be a fight on the left progressive side of the spectrum, that COVID has made Canada more, has tilted Canada leftward, more to the idea that government fixes your problems. That's a gamble. And the Conservatives are going to be betting that that Canadians want a little more of a center-right approach to things. So the stage is set, but we are a long way away from an election. In my view.
That's interesting. That's fascinating. So we'll have to wait to see if that plays out. So listen, I want to thank Kevin, Trevin, and Susan. You've been a great contributors to this live event. I wish we could have been there in person, but hope to see you soon. Please stay safe, stay well. All right. As we're wrapping up here, I'd like to bring back Su Ling into the conversation. Welcome back, Su Ling.
Thank you, Michael. Well done.
Well, that was a jam-packed 1 hour. My goodness, I don't think we could have crammed more into that session. Any other thoughts, Su Ling, as we're wrapping up? We heard, of course, from Minister Mona Fortier. She gave us some highlights. We had a Q&A. Gavin did a great job of breaking down the technicalities of the budget and our expert panel. Thoughts as we kind of wrap up here?
Just, to reinforce what we heard throughout the event and what Susan also emphasized is how important it is as we move forward to not only continue but also strengthen the collaboration between all levels of government, the business community, and the government in order to ensure we have a solid footing for moving forward. So all these plans are terrific, and we wanted to see certainty in the budget for businesses and some investments in the future, but it's the execution that'll be key. And if we can continue to communicate at this high a level, then we're optimistic.
Well, the point's well taken, because as we've seen, the situation can change on a day-to-day basis. So you and the Board of Trade are really on the front lines of keeping our political leaders and public health officials informed, about what's happening on main streets and other types of businesses. So you're right. We do need that type of strong relationship, Su-Ling. So let me wrap up by recognizing our sponsors once again. I want to thank MNP for being a longtime sponsor of this event. Also, Hugh Williams and Impact Public Affairs. They help support this event in several different ways. Today's networking was sponsored by Algonquin College, and our global event partner is Oakwood Design and Build, led by John Liptak out in the East End and his partners. And listen, this event is now going to conclude, but it is available, Su-Ling, as you know, for replay. It will be available on OBJ's YouTube channel and Facebook. The same is true of the Board of Trade's YouTube and Facebook. So you can go to either of those accounts and see it almost instantaneously. That brings us to the end of today's event. As we look forward, Su-Ling, I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about the City Building Summit, though, just for a second. So this is a big event that's been months in the planning, very important from an advocacy point of view for the Board of Trade. So tell us about the events coming up on Friday, April 30th, by the way.
Thank you for mentioning that, Michael. I wanted to mention that as well, is that we're looking forward to this event. There's going to be a great networking opportunity associated with it. We have fantastic keynote speakers, experts in the fields of city building and place branding, and we have the city there, Alain Maguilez, to talk about Ottawa 2040, and then some fantastic expert panels on economic development and some high impact projects in Ottawa. So we're really thinking of this event as a great way to start a conversation or continue the conversation about where we want Ottawa to be in the future and what and how that will impact the recovery. So we invite everyone from the community and the business community to be involved.
And they can go to ottawabot.ca, go to the events page to register. And I love the vision. It is a vision of bringing together lots of groups that kind of have regular professional discussions, but don't always come together in a bigger community, particularly with the Board of Trade. So that's city planners and the NCC and developers. You have a great keynote, Jennifer Keesmaat, lined up, and also talking about some of the social issues, by the way, too. So it's not only about the physical infrastructure. It's going to be a fascinating discussion. So once again, that's Friday, April 30th coming up. Check it out at ottawabot.ca. That's all the time we have for today. On behalf of our sponsors, our partners, all of today's panelists and expert presenters, and of course, Su-Ling Cheng, I'm Mike Curran signing off for the Ottawa Business Journal. Hope to see you really soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Michael.